Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. Today we might even be educational. I'm not entirely sure whether we're going to be educational. Quick, let's say something educational. Um,
Don't eat yellow
uh,
snow.
don't eat yellow snow. Don't spit into the wind. Can we have a third educational thing?
Don't
You
become a
can always
Wiccan.
trust. You can always trust people to act within their nature. There we go. So, what's this story about this Cersei? And is it the Cersei we know, or is it a different Cersei? Cersei Dreamland? Or is it the
Uh,
original one?
the original Cersei.
Original Cersei. What is the story of the original Cersei? Is that the one with the pigs in it?
Yeah.
With the squealers? Something about a bunch of police go to the island?
No.
All these. What was that about police on an island then?
Police on an island.
Yeah, something about she had an island full of police officers. Pigs or something.
No. Not those kind of pigs, Liam.
What sort of pigs is it?
I'm
Not the
not even
oink.
sure. I'm not even sure our foreign friends would even know or would even use the phrase pigs as police officers.
No? They not call them
Yeah, no.
squealers. They call them cops, don't they, in America? Cops.
Yeah.
If our American friends don't know what a squealer is, basically, you know that the police cars, they go like, Nino, Nino. They squeal, don't they? So squealers are police officers because they squeal. Actually, you could consider them to be emergency services. However, you will find that different emergency service vehicles have different sirens. And I believe, from what I remember, those specific sirens vary depending on, I think, the ambulance ones used to vary depending on what hospital they come from or what hospital they're going to. Because you, the public, are supposed to know what direction the ambulance is going in, which is probably why they scrapped that idea. But there we go. So, the story of Cersei, the ill-tempered botanist, it's a
Yeah.
classic,
So
isn't it?
it is a classic. So it's from Homer's Odyssey. So it's one of the things that stops Odysseus getting home quick enough on his return after the fall of Troy. So
Which
one of
episode of The
the things.
Simpsons was that? Why are you
Wow.
shaking your head? They can't see.
No, but you can see me shout. It's shaking my head in disappointment.
Why are you shaking your head with disappointment?
You said this is going to be might be educational, and then you start talking about the Simpsons.
Okay. Well, for those that want to know, it was Series 1, Episode 3. Because The Simpsons did actually do a Homer's Odyssey. I don't know if you knew that.
No, did they? I never
I
saw
mean,
that
come
one.
on, they had to, didn't they?
Yeah, I suppose.
Everyone else rips off the classics. Why wouldn't Matt Groening?
So yeah, so obviously the point, the classical point that was trying to be made was obviously about this. Well, she's described essentially as a witch. She's not referred to or an enchantress. She's not actually, until much later she kind of becomes a goddess. But to a certain extent, she would probably classify as a demigod. But she was essentially deified later. She wasn't always a goddess.
So some form of magical practitioner who has their own island, like
Yeah.
Fort Park, except less fun. Presumably, if you went there, you would not be having a fun, no?
I don't know. The question is whether or not you'd care. Like, they were all given magical potions in order to make them not be aware of anything that was going on. So,
Careful, your ethics are showing again.
well, it's just one of those things. If everyone thinks they're having a great time and isn't aware of the fact they're slowly being, having their brains eaten by something parasitic, it wouldn't wouldn't technically, any of them would technically be aware of it, would they? So
No, but you
does
can
it
say that
really mean
people
they've
that
had a
get,
bad time?
you can say that about people that end up getting their drinks spiked in clubs and such like that. I mean, they're not aware of it, but I still think it's immoral.
It may be, but whose morals are that based on? Not
Societies,
mine.
because you can be prosecuted for date rape and such in this century, Chris. At least you can in the UK. I don't know about other places.
Yes, but date raping drugs, you're out of it, so can't have an experience. This is saying you're having a pleasurable experience.
What, as a pig on an island?
Yeah. Now as happy as a pig in muck, Liam.
Okay. This is descending quickly, so can we rescue it? Let's talk about something practical.
Well,
is it one of your favorite stories? Do you like that story of Circe? I mean, it's very archetypical classic witch. She'd be referred to as a classic witch, I guess, wouldn't she? Like the old Witch of Endor and such.
Yeah, definitely. She definitely fits that category.
Oh. But what is, in your opinion, a classical witch? What is the archetype there?
For me, it's a case of predate, using a practice that is earthly, but not in a let's hug a tree way, but as is solid in what is the core of physical magic, I guess, of grounded earth-based practice.
For me, it's about I'm a human with a lot of power. It's my way or the highway. That's what classical witchcraft says to me. Because it seems to be that's the kind of archetype of the person that practices it. At least that's what survives anyway. I mean, it's not like what a lot of these people would seem to have you believe is the modern neo-pagan kind of priestesshood and all that, which is all kind of normally love and lighty, nicey. When you look back at kind of the famous examples of actual famous practitioners, whether it be from classics or whether it be real life ones, then they tend to have a little bit of guts and kind of personality, don't they?
Yeah. But that's because they've got power, therefore are capable of building or forging their own path. And I think that's what's often kind of forgotten when it comes to modern craft. So modern craft, everybody's trying to follow what sounds the coolest, generally speaking. Whereas, the classical witch is someone, yes, they may have a practice that involves a deity, potentially, but that's not going to be worship in the way that we would consider today, where you're a begging magic in that sense. In the classical world, you're keeping deities happy all the time, not just when you want something, so that essentially you've already paid the debt when you want something to happen that is beyond your power. But the classical witch obviously could carve out their own space in the world. You just had to be feared enough that nobody wanted to come knocking. So, whereas nowadays, going to the witch is kind of last resort, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so classical and ancient practice, it was very culty, but the old-fashioned term of the cult. So I suppose practitioners and such, they might not necessarily be famous, but the mantle that they would hold would probably be quite famous. Whereas classical witchcraft and that from a literary perspective seems to be very much about independent personalities that have their own practice and are sought out because they have their own practice. They're an expert or they're renowned for a specific thing. They're not like, oh, this is the such and such person this generation that's come out of Hogwarts type thing. It's literally like they've got and developed their own practice. They're famous for their own thing, and sometimes it's natural ability and ability from some kind of divine lineage and stuff, like demigods and stuff like that. Might be like abilities and powers and stuff that they've just got because they're demigods. But there's got to be personality to it. There's always some sort of personality to it.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to the kind of herb part of it, which is why I'd kind of subtitled it, you know, why we'd gone about the ill-tempered botanist, is because obviously with Odysseus's men in the story of Circe, obviously he's drugged. Well, Odysseus isn't, but the rest of the crew are drugged by a magical plant. It's never said what it is, but a magical plant drugs them. It's kind of hidden by the taste of, I think it was barley and honey or something like that in the wine. It'd been some kind of, but the interesting part of it is there's the fix to it is also a herb. So Odysseus is given a special herb from Hermes, who allows him to go in and not be affected by the original drug, which is quite nice in that kind of balance of, herb and antidote, baneful herb and an antidote. But obviously that's kind of why Circe is considered as dangerous as she is because she's a viper, so they need an antidote to deal with the viper's bite.
When you say viper, do you mean she's going through the menopause?
Maybe.
Or has she always been a viper? Do you think she was nicer when she were younger? Or do you think that it was something to do with hormones and shit?
I don't know. She's daughter of a sun god, for God's sake. So what would you?
Probably a big ego, then.
So although you never really hear a massive amount about Helios, other than his sun chariot, you don't really get a massive amount discussed about him.
Favorite of yours, though, as far as sun gods go?
Yes, I much prefer Helios to your mate Apollo, but that's just my personal
We're
taste.
not exactly mates, It's just that I've worked with him and he's answered the call enough times. So, sometimes it's best to stick to what you know.
Yeah. Also, because he looks pretty in a toga, like that's about it.
When he wears it, yeah.
So, no good trying to fool me, love. Like I know you're going. Got fuck all to do with answered my call, bollocks.
He answered my booty call. Oh.
Right.
Anyway, so are we going to talk about herbs then in this or something? There's a special one that's it's not really a herb, but it is some sort of compound and such from monkfish in it, where they turn people into zombies. I forget what it's called. So when they make the zombie powder, which you blow in people's faces, and then they basically appear to die, it slows the heart rate down, and then people think that they're dead, so they bury them, and then they kind of get dug up by a practitioner and such. So it basically kills off brain cells and stuff and puts them in some sort of suggestible state that you can.
I was going to say it also makes them very, very suggestible, doesn't it?
Yeah, but no, I mean it's a scary thing, isn't it? A zombification. That's legit. You can do it. I really wanted to sell some of that powder in the under the counter Thoth witchcraft shop, but I was never able to get my hands on it. Or was I? I don't know. But I suppose people could make inquiries if they really wanted to. Anyway, Chris, what herbs would you like to talk about and such? Anything in particular? Are we talking about specific herbs? Are we talking about formulas? How to turn people into pigs?
It makes sense to kind of think about kind of herbs of transformation is one way to approach that. The other one is kind of ill-tempered botanists, kind of sounds baneful, and kind of having a chat potentially about those. But,
short-tempered teachers.
Yeah, maybe.
very often people that are very good at something are very good at that thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that they like to teach or are any good at teaching.
Oh, definitely. But we could go on and on and on about that from a mentorship point of view, and talk about how some individuals make very bad students, other people make very bad mentors, and I think there's a
We could
balance that
talk
has.
about that in another episode if you like. We
Yeah,
could
there's a
call it
balance that has to be struck.
mental mentoring.
Yes, the madness of mentoring.
The madness of mentoring. I'll add it to the list.
So, but yeah, the I don't know. It depends. Do you want to start with baneful first, or kind of mythical plants of transformation? You could say that tree of life is a big one of those in the Garden of Eden. You know,
The
how
tree
could one?
of knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, how could one fruit cause so much trouble, eh?
Mm.
And they want you to eat 5 a day.
I know, 5 lots of trouble a day. It's an imbalance, isn't it? So basically, what are you having? 3 lots of the trouble and 2 lots of the good, or 2 lots of the trouble and 3 lots of the good? It depends.
I refused a banana today. I really hate bananas.
Does goodness and morality repeat on you as well? I mean, they say the bad stuff happens 3 times or something, isn't it?
Good and bad luck comes in 3s.
Mm. Okay, so I have a question for you. Question that a lot of people, I think, have, but they don't tend to ask it, which I'm always surprised at. And that is that if I hear of some sort of plant or herb or formula or potion or something like that, whether it's in literature, whether it be from legend, whether it be carved on some temple wall or something like that, how dost thou find out what the actual formula is? What's the go-to for you? And how would you answer that question if a random person at a psychic fair came up to you and said, how would one find out this? What are your... Go on, teach us.
Well, there's the mundane way.
Yeah.
There is the mundane way of figuring out exactly what those representatives are. Now, some of those you might not be able to find on the basis that they're not in some compendium for you to go and discover, because people haven't written them down, or they were kind of irregular enough. Kind of you have in Egyptian temples, there are lots of depictions of gardens, medicinal gardens, and you've got to be able to decode those stylized representations of those individual plants or trees or whatever it is available. You know, one way about it is kind of going the very kind of detective way, trying to figure out exactly what those things represent. Lots of people will go down the kind of folklore route, and they'll go and look at, oh, well, we used to call this that, now it's called this, and then kind of go from like human experience and what bits and pieces have been written down. Me personally, I'd probably go the intuitive method, as I normally would, and kind of spend time with each of those. If it has to start with the image because you don't have any residue, like it's one thing if you discovered a plant and didn't know what it was. It's a bit different if you're discovering a drawing or a written account of a plant that you've never met before. So I would probably go through that sort of route, kind of an astral exploration of what that thing was, and kind of go from there. But that's just because that's how my brain naturally works. Is kind of going, oh, okay, well, I'll figure this out. Like lots of people make Kyphi. I know we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
But there's lots of people that would go an experimental route of, well, I know what these 8 are. I'll just experiment my way to get to the 15 ingredients or the 16 ingredients that most of them have got. Whereas, equally, I'm more likely to go down the route of stripping those back and kind of going closer to a thieves vinegar kind of process of going, well, actually, do I need 20 things that say could be said by 4? It would depend on what the process is. What about you?
Well, the reason why I bring it up is because it is a question that I expect people to bring up more, but they don't tend to. The reason why I expect people to bring it up more is because there's the approach nowadays that people assume that the ancients and ancient peoples knew more about magic and stuff than we do now, which is both true and false, because it depends on who you're talking about, both ancient wise and also modern wise. But they kind of romanticize the view that there's secret hidden knowledge that is lost, which there's a lot of stuff like that is lost. However, they then try to reverse engineer and find it. So if you've got something like you've spoken about Kyphi or Kyphi and that incense from Egypt, they would attempt to try and find out what the ingredients were listed on some papyrus or something. And you can find people that have already done research like that in history and such. So that's all well and good. You've also got the perspective of, oh, we found this random potion or something in a tomb. Why don't we do some sort of, I don't know whether multispectral analysis of what's actually in it and see what we can find out that it contains. Oh, look, it's jars of honey type situation, which is another approach, because that's like more of a chemist's approach to things. But then you've got more of a magical practitioner's approach, which sometimes can take you off in a tangent. So when I did Kyphi research, obviously you had some listed in terms of formulas, and you were able to say exactly what papyri they came from, when, the age, date range, all that sort of was, dynasties and stuff like that. Whereas when I took up the approach of making it, I didn't get the formula. I got the concept of it. So the first thing that came through was the concept and the manufacturing process, because I did the more intuitive type thing, or the pulling in of information. And I got okay, we're starting with the process. And I was like, no, I want the ingredients. No, we're starting with the process. There needs to be a dry, there needs to be a wet. Dry, wet, opposites, right? And like stuff like that. I was like, right, okay, all right, I'll humor you, I'll carry on. You can't get this, so you'll use this. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not an original recipe. It's like, well, do you want it to work or not? Because if you use that, it's not going to work. I'm like, oh, okay. Because the point in which you're kind of like, first off, you need to think about what is it that you're trying to make work or make happen. And people think of it in terms of, oh, there's an old incense or there's an old remedy for something. Nowadays, we would think like, it would be stupid to say, the legendary penicillin. I know. You're coming down with the sniffles? We'll get a load and we'll inject you with it. And it's like, I'm not entirely sure whether that's a good idea. And maybe the person is allergic to penicillin. That kind of thing is like, people don't really think about that. People don't think about, well, maybe this was super specific. You're trying to recreate a formula and you're reducing it down to, this is for every use. You can use it for anything, or like the legends of it maybe are true. I don't know. I like the whole Four Thieves thing, because whenever you get Four Thieves vinegar, the whole thing that you get, if you try to pull in information on it, is usually the process and the purpose of it and the story. You get the formula as in an equation, not as in, it's more like algebra. It's more like this equals, or this component part. Feels more like a tarot spread, when you get these tarot spreads and it says, I'm not telling you what the card is, I'm telling you when you put the card in there, that's what it means. That bit's the past, that bit's the present, and that bit's the future. Whereas people are like, No. I want to know what cards should be there. No. You need to understand first that that one is where it goes there, and you pull one. That is the past. That is the present, and that was the future. But when you read 1,000 years ago, which one went in the present, which one went in the past, and which one went in the future? And I'll just do the same thing, surely. And it don't work out like that.
No. Well, this is the thing. This is the thing for me with the Kyphi part, is the fact, well, at that point they would have used these for a specific reason. So if, ultimately the goal was to provide a sacred space that would have allowed a particular deity to exist in that space. So if you don't know who you're inviting, why would you just follow a recipe? But we have the same problem every time we talk about fucking magic circles, don't we? It's the same concept. Well, if you don't know those people that you're calling, why are you calling them just because the book says? And I think with Kyphi, there's a similar process there of people will kind of go, well, it's the way it was done, so we've got to do it that way. And I think for me, Kyphi, I wanted an original recipe, but not because it's an original recipe. What I
should see the kernel.
Yeah, what I'm interested about is actually what was different about the time they were trying to use it in that century to that century. And that interests me, because I'm wondering, by figuring out what that combination is, I will have some kind of inkling as to what they were trying to bring in. But you've got to understand the context for those, and they won't be written down in the book. Because all that would be written is to remind themselves this combination worked. The same way when you read a magician's manual, all you're going to see is these are the ingredients that worked. Again, with a lot of the old herbals, they just say which herbs, not necessarily how much of. It's our Disney representation and our kind of mythology kind of representation that says, Macbeth, eye of newt, tongue of dog, or whatever it is just listing the ingredients to make sure that people know what the ingredients are. They're not telling you how much of each.
Oh yeah.
Or how those items are combined. Are they combined all at the same time, or is the process involved in actually adding them over time at particular points in the cycle? We both talk about Kyphi a lot because it's kind of that pinnacle of a particular kind of craft. It was the kind of masterpiece of the kind of herbals of old, is having something like that. All the kind of Four Thieves vinegar, they are kind of these perfect representations, which is why it starts with the, like you say, E equals MC squared is more what it's like than algebra. It's actually, this is a representation of what power is required. You need to understand what all these ingredients do in order to actually make any sense of what's being asked of you. And yeah, my interest in Kyphi is more a case of understanding what they were trying to pull in more specifically, because they're talked about in the old manuals by people that weren't part of those initiated spaces. So actually, would they have known, other than a list of what was actually in them or how they were made? So I kind of, that for me is what particularly interests me about those kind of processes, is figuring that out.
So if you formulated, because I know you haven't made any, at least this century, Kyphi, but if you formulated it, because we had a working document, and I went off on one tangent going for the creation of magician's Kyphi for a project I was working on, and you went more true to the traditional, but then we both took the approach of what would Kyphi be if the Egyptians moved to Scotland or something, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Would they be using the same recipe, or would it have evolved?
Yeah.